Stand in the courtyard of Topkapi Palace today, and you can hear the call to prayer drift over the Bosphorus just as it did 600 years ago. More than 15 million tourists walk these marble halls each year, photographing thrones and trying to imagine the men who sat on them. But rewind 7 centuries, and you would have found a Turkic warlord named Osman commanding 300 horsemen in the rain-soaked hills of Bithynia, staring at Byzantine watchtowers and dreaming of conquest. Horsemen. Conquest. Faith. Collapse. Using cutting-edge AI reconstruction, we are about to walk you through every reign of the Ottoman dynasty, from Osman's first raid in 1299 to the last sultan boarding a British warship in 1922, 36 men who turned a frontier principality into an empire that held 3 continents and made Europe tremble. This is not the story of one ruler. It is the story of a family that refused to stop expanding until the world forced it to stop. A dynasty that lasted longer than Rome's Julio-Claudians, longer than the Romanovs, longer than any royal house in European history. And it began with a dream in a tent. Osman I was born around 1258 into the Kai tribe, one of dozens of Turkic clans fleeing the Mongol storm sweeping across Central Asia. His father Ertugrul had pledged loyalty to the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum in exchange for grazing land near Sogat, a nothing village on the Byzantine frontier. When Ertugrul died in 1281, Osman inherited perhaps 400 families and a stretch of Anatolian grassland wedged between 2 dying empires. The Seljuks were collapsing. Byzantium was bleeding from the Fourth Crusade's wound. And Osman saw the gap. In 1299, he declared independence and began raiding Byzantine estates, offering his warriors plunder and his Christian subjects protection in exchange for taxes. Within a decade, he controlled the roads between Bursa and Nicaea. His son Orhan captured Bursa in 1326 and made it the capital. Osman died that same year, but his name became the dynasties, Osmanli in Turkish, Ottoman in the West. Orhan understood that empires are not built by cavalry alone. He created the first standing Ottoman army, recruited Greek and Armenian administrators, minted coins bearing his face, and married a Byzantine princess named Theodora to legitimize his rule in Christian eyes. In 1354, an earthquake shattered the walls of Gallipoli, and Orhan's son Süleyman crossed the Dardanelles with 6,000 men. It was the Ottomans' first foothold in Europe, and they never left. Orhan's son Murad I took the throne in 1362 and moved the capital to Edirne, deep in Thrace. He defeated a coalition of Serbs, Bosnians, and Bulgarians at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, cementing Ottoman control of the Balkans. Murad was assassinated on the battlefield by a Serbian knight who pretended to surrender, but his son Bayezid I immediately ordered his own brother strangled to prevent civil war, a practice that would become Ottoman law. Bayezid earned the nickname Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, for the speed of his campaigns. He besieged Constantinople in 1397 and declared himself Sultan of Rum, claiming the Seljuk inheritance. Europe panicked. Pope Boniface IX called a crusade. A French-Hungarian army marched east and met Bayezid at Nicopolis in 1396. Bayezid annihilated them. 10,000 crusaders died. The Ottoman Empire now stretched from the Danube to the Euphrates, and it had been less than a century since Osman's first raid. In 1402, the Thunderbolt collided with another storm. Timur, the Turco-Mongol conqueror who had destroyed Delhi and sacked Baghdad, invaded Anatolia with an army twice the size of Bayezid's. They met at the Battle of Ankara on July 20, 1402. Bayezid's Anatolian vassals defected mid-battle. His janissaries fought to the last man, but the result was catastrophic. Bayezid was captured, dragged across Asia in a gilded cage, and died in captivity 8 months later. Timur carved Anatolia back into petty principalities and left. The Ottoman state shattered. Bayezid's son spent the next 11 years killing each other in a civil war the Turks called the Interregnum. Suleiman held Europe. Mehmed held Amasia. Isa held Bursa, briefly. Musa raised an army in the Balkans. By 1413, only Mehmed I remained. He spent his 8-year reign gluing the empire back together, suppressing revolts, rebuilding the army, and ruthlessly centralizing power. When he died in 1421, his son Murad II inherited a state that had survived its greatest existential crisis. Murad II spent 30 years securing the empire's borders. He crushed a Hungarian crusade at Vienna in 1444, killing King Władysław III and ending Europe's last coordinated attempt to expel the Ottomans from the Balkans. He defeated John Hunayadi again at the Second Battle of Kosovo in 1448. He annexed Serbian despotates, Greek principalities, and Anatolian beyliks one by one. When he abdicated briefly in 1444 to let his 12-year-old son Mehmed rule, the boy failed so spectacularly that Murad had to retake the throne. But Mehmed learned. When Murad II died in 1451, Mehmed II was 21 and ready. 2 years later, on May 29, 1453, Mehmed's cannons breached the walls of Constantinople after a 57-day siege. The last Roman emperor, Constantine XI, died fighting in the streets. Mehmed walked into Hagia Sophia, ordered it converted into a mosque, and declared himself Caesar-i-Rum, Caesar of Rome. The medieval world ended that Tuesday morning. Mehmed the Conqueror spent the next 30 years transforming Istanbul into the empire's eternal capital. He built the Topkapi Palace, repopulated the city with Greeks, Armenians, Jews, and Turks, and invited Italian artists to his court. He conquered the Peloponnese, Trebizond, Wallachia, Bosnia, and Albania. When the Venetian Senate refused to cede territory, Mehmed invaded Italy itself, sacking Otranto in 1480. He was planning to march on Rome when he died in 1481 at the age of 49, possibly poisoned. His legacy was an empire of 2 million square kilometers and the psychological triumph of erasing Byzantium from the map. His son Bayezid II inherited a state at the height of its power, but also the beginning of a new struggle. Bayezid's brother Cem Sultan fled to Europe and became a hostage pawn held by the Pope, the Knights of Rhodes, and the French king. For 13 years, the threat of a rival claimant backed by Christian armies paralyzed Ottoman policy. When Cem died in 1495, Bayezid finally consolidated control, but his later years were consumed by a succession war among his sons. In 1512, his son Selim forced him to abdicate and possibly poisoned him. Selim I, called the Grim, would prove the most ruthless sultan yet. Selim I ruled for only 8 years, but he doubled the empire's size. In 1514, he marched east and destroyed the Safavid Persian army at the Battle of Calderon, annexing Kurdistan and securing Anatolia's eastern frontier. Then he turned south. In 1516, he crushed the Mamluks at Marj Dabik, conquered Syria, and entered Damascus. In 1517, he took Cairo and declared himself Caliph of Islam, protector of Mecca and Medina. The Ottomans now controlled the holy cities, the spice routes, the grain supplies of Egypt, and the allegiance of the Sunni Muslim world. When Selim died in 1520, his son Süleyman inherited the wealthiest, most powerful state on earth. Süleyman I would rule for 46 years and become the empire's defining figure. The Turks called him Kanuni, the lawgiver, for his comprehensive legal reforms. The Europeans called him the Magnificent, and they meant it as a warning. In 1521, Süleyman captured Belgrade. In 1522, he took Rhodes from the Knights Hospitaller after a 6-month siege. In 1526, he annihilated the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohacs, killing King Louis II and turning Hungary into an Ottoman vassal state. In 1529, he besieged Vienna with 100,000 men. The siege failed, stopped by autumn rain and overextended supply lines, but the psychological impact was profound. Ottoman soldiers had camped within sight of the Habsburg capital. For the next century, the phrase "the Turk at the gates" would haunt European imaginations. Süleyman's wars in the east were equally relentless. He fought for campaigns against Persia, capturing Baghdad in 1534 and securing Mesopotamia. He allied with France against the Habsburgs, sending his fleet to raid the Spanish and Italian coasts. His admiral Barbarossa controlled the Mediterranean. His architects built the Süleymani Mosque, a structure designed to rival Hagia Sophia. His legal code standardized taxation, criminal justice, and land tenure across the empire's kaleidoscope of languages and faiths. But Suleiman's reign also planted the seeds of future crisis. His wife Hurrem Sultan, known in the West as Roxolana, convinced him to execute his firstborn son Mustafa in 1553 on suspicion of treason, clearing the path for her own son Selim. The decision shattered the tradition of meritocratic succession and introduced harem intrigue into dynastic politics. When Suleiman died in 1566 during the siege of Sigetvar, his son Selim too became sultan. Selim the Drunkard spent 8 years in alcoholic stupor while his Grand Vizier Süleyman Pasha ran the empire. The Ottomans conquered Cyprus in 1570, provoking a Holy League of Spain, Venice, and the papacy. In 1571, the Christian fleet destroyed the Ottoman navy at the Battle of Lepanto, killing 30,000 Ottoman sailors and shattering the myth of Ottoman invincibility at sea. The empire rebuilt its fleet within a year, but the psychological wound never healed. Selim drowned in a bathhouse in 1574, possibly drunk. His son Murad III inherited an empire still expanding but beginning to show cracks. Murad waged a disastrous 14-year war against Persia that drained the treasury. Inflation ravaged the currency as silver from the New World flooded Ottoman markets. Provincial governors began acting like independent warlords. Janissaries rioted over unpaid wages. Murad retreated into the harem, fathered over 100 children, and let his mother and the Grand Vizier govern. When he died in 1595, his son Mehmed III followed tradition and had his 19 brothers strangled to secure the throne. The practice, called fratricide, had been Ottoman law since Mehmed II, but the scale of the 1595 massacre horrified even the Ottomans. It was the dynasty's high water mark and the beginning of its slow erosion. The 17th century was the age of sultans who never left the palace. Ahmed I, who took the throne in 1603 at age 13, built the Blue Mosque and ended the practice of fratricide, instead confining rival princes to the kafes, the gilded cage of the harem. His nephew Osman II tried to reform the Janissaries in 1622 and was strangled by them in the palace dungeon. His uncle Mustafa I was declared insane twice, deposed, reinstated, and deposed again. The empire's center of gravity shifted from the sultan to the harem, where queen mothers wielded real power. Kozum Sultan effectively ruled the empire for decades as regent and power behind the throne, until she was strangled with a curtain cord in 1651 by supporters of her daughter-in-law. Yet the empire continued expanding. Murad IV, who became sultan at age 11 in 1623, grew into a brutal autocrat who personally beheaded corrupt officials and led the army to recapture Baghdad from Persia in 1638. He banned alcohol, tobacco, and coffee on pain of death, then drank himself to death at 28. His brother Ibrahim the Mad was deposed after 8 years of erratic rule and executed in 1648. His 6-year-old son Mehmed IV somehow presided over the empire's last great military revival. Under the Grand Vizier Köprülü Mehmed Pasha and his son Köprülü Fazil Ahmed Pasha, the empire crushed revolts, reconquered Transylvania, and took Crete from Venice after a 24-year siege. In 1683, Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha besieged Vienna again with 150,000 men. This time, the Holy Roman Empire, Poland, and the Papal States formed a coalition. On September 12, 1683, the Polish King Jan III Sobieski led the largest cavalry charge in history down the hills outside Vienna. The Ottoman army broke and fled. Kara Mustafa was strangled on the Sultan's orders in December. The defeat triggered a catastrophic war. Between 1683 and 1699, the Holy League recaptured Hungary, Transylvania, and most of the Balkans. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 marked the first time the Ottomans signed a peace as the losing side. The age of expansion was over. The 18th century became the age of survival. The empire fought disastrous wars against Russia, Austria, and Persia. Sultans came and went, Ahmed III deposed in 1730, Mustafa III dying during a war in 1774, Selim III overthrown by Janissaries in 1807 and murdered in 1808. Provincial governors in Egypt, Syria, and the Balkans stopped obeying Istanbul. The Janissary corps became a hereditary caste more interested in guild politics than warfare. In 1826, Sultan Mehmed II had finally had enough. When the Janissaries revolted, he brought cannons into the hippodrome and slaughtered them by the thousands. The event of auspicious incident, as propaganda called it, destroyed the empire's oldest military institution and opened the door to Western-style reform. But it was too late. The 19th century was an uninterrupted nightmare. In 1821, Greece revolted. By 1832, it was independent. In 1830, France invaded Algeria. In 1831, Muhammad Ali of Egypt nearly toppled the Sultan before British intervention. In 1853, Russia invaded Ottoman territory, triggering the Crimean War. The Ottomans won only because Britain and France fought on their side, and the price was economic subjugation. European banks controlled Ottoman finances, European officers trained Ottoman armies, European powers claimed the right to protect Christian minorities. Abdülmecid I and his brother Abdulaziz tried reform, the Tanzimat era of legal equality, secular courts, and constitutional governance, but opposition came from all sides. Conservatives hated westernization. Liberals thought reform moved too slowly. Nationalists in the Balkans wanted independence. In 1876, Abdulaziz was deposed and found dead with his wrists slashed. His nephew Murad V lasted 93 days before being declared insane. His brother Abdülhamid II took the throne in September 1876 and would rule for 33 years. Abdülhamid II was the empire's last powerful sultan. He promulgated a constitution in 1876, then suspended it in 1878 and ruled as an autocrat. He built railroads, telegraph lines, and a vast spy network. He manipulated European rivalries, playing Germany against Britain and France against Russia. He survived dozens of assassination attempts and lost vast territories. Romania, Serbia, Montenegro, and Bulgaria all gained independence. Bosnia was occupied by Austria-Hungary. Egypt was occupied by Britain. In 1908, the Young Turk Revolution forced him to restore the constitution. In 1909, he was deposed and imprisoned in Thessaloniki. His brother Mehmed V became a figurehead. Real power passed to the Committee of Union and Progress, a military junta led by three men, Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Semel Pasha. They dreamed of reversing Ottoman decline through modernization and nationalism. Instead, they gambled the empire's survival on World War I. In 1914, they signed a secret alliance with Germany. When the war began, Enver Pasha launched a disastrous winter invasion of the Caucasus and blamed the Armenian population for the defeat. In 1915, the Cup ordered the Armenian deportations, death marches into the Syrian desert that killed over 1 million people. The empire's Balkan and Arab provinces collapsed. British and Arab forces took Jerusalem, Damascus, and Baghdad. Greek armies invaded Anatolia. When the Armistice of Mudros was signed in October 1918, the 600-year-old empire effectively ceased to exist. Mehmed V had died in 1918. His brother Mehmed VI, the 36th Sultan, presided over the empire's dismemberment. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 reduced the empire to a rump state around Ankara. But a general named Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was already leading a nationalist resistance in Anatolia, and he had no loyalty to the Sultanate. On November 1, 1922, the Grand National Assembly in Ankara voted to abolish the Sultanate. Mehmed VI fled Istanbul on a British warship 13 days later, disguised in civilian clothes and carrying a single suitcase. He died in exile in San Remo, Italy, in 1926, a pensioner of Mussolini. His cousin Abdülmecid II was briefly declared caliph, a spiritual figurehead without political power, but even that symbolic office was abolished in March 1924. The Ottoman dynasty scattered to Paris, Cairo, New York, and London. Some descendants became musicians, architects, and writers. Osman I, Osman, the last pretender, worked as a librarian in Manhattan and did not return to Turkey until 1992. He died in 2009 and was buried in Damascus, near the tomb of Saladin. The palaces were turned into museums. The archives were open to scholars. The last Ottoman princes and princesses grew old in foreign cities, speaking Turkish with accents, writing memoirs no one read. The dynasty that had ruled longer than any European house, that had created a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire stretching from Budapest to Basra, that had terrified Europe for 3 centuries and then slowly collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, ended not with a revolution or a war but with a vote and a ferry ride. 36 sultans. 623 years. And in the end, a train ticket to exile. Stand in the courtyard of Topkapi Palace today, and you can still see the throne room where Süleyman received ambassadors and Mehmed IV watched his empire fracture. 85 million tourists visit Istanbul every year, walking the same marble corridors where sultans once commanded 3 continents. The dynasty is gone, but its architecture, its legal codes, its bureaucratic traditions, and its haunted memory remain stitched into the fabric of a dozen modern nations. From the Balkans to the Levant, from North Africa to the Caucasus, the Ottoman centuries cast a shadow so long that historians still argue whether it was an empire of tolerance or oppression, enlightenment or stagnation. The truth is it was both, and it lasted longer than Rome because it adapted until it could not adapt anymore. 36 men inherited the same throne. Some were conquerors. Some were poets. Some were madmen. But together, they built something that refused to die quickly, even when the world turned against it. The Ottoman Empire did not collapse in a day. It bled for a century and died in installments, and somewhere in that long, slow fall, it became a ghost that still walks the streets of every city it ever ruled. A dynasty that history cannot forget.